Arthur Dayne stood sentinel in the shadowed corridor of the Red Keep, his white cloak a pale reflection of torchlight dancing across polished marble floors. He had stood guard here many times before, outside the throne room, outside Princess Elia's chambers, outside the king's private apartments. Always watchful, always resolute. Yet tonight, he felt a gathering storm within his soul, a tremor of change that threatened to shatter the rigid vows he had lived by for years. The Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, was dying behind those closed doors, his labored breaths echoing against the stone walls, and for the first time in Arthur's life, duty felt heavier than dawn, the legendary sword he bore at his hip. He remembered the king's last ravings, words that had grown increasingly unhinged over the preceding months. Aerys had been consumed by paranoia, muttering about traitors lurking in every corridor, conspiracies woven by lords he once considered friends. His hair had thinned to wisps of silver tangling around a gaunt face. His eyes were sunken and lined with red, but they burned with a fire that had scorched many unfortunate souls. Ser Arthur had guarded that man with unflinching loyalty, for that was the sacred vow, to protect the king from all harm, no matter the cost, no matter the madness. But all men die, Arthur knew, and the Mad King's final hour had come without the blaze of wildfire Aerys once threatened to unleash on King's Landing. Instead, he lay on a bed drenched in sweat, blankets twisted around scrawny limbs, rattling out his last feeble exhalations. Arthur felt neither relief nor sorrow, only a kind of taut, unnerving anticipation. The realm was already on a knife's edge. The rebellion, begun under Robert Baratheon's banner, had ravaged the countryside. Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince, had died on the Trident. And now, with the king about to vanish from this world before the gates of King's Landing could even be threatened with siege, there would be a question of what came next. Late at night, in the hallway, Arthur was joined by Ser Oswell Went, another loyal Kingsguard. Ser Oswell's face was ashen, and the flicker of torches revealed the deepening lines of worry on his brow. He approached Arthur quietly, mindful of the hush that had fallen over the entire wing of the castle. "Is it over?" Arthur asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Oswell shook his head. "They say Grand Maester Pycelle thinks there could be an hour left, maybe two." Arthur nodded. "And what of Prince Viserys? Has he been told?" "As well as Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys," said Oswell. "They are too young to understand the meaning of a king's death, but they will learn soon enough." Arthur felt a pang of grief for the children. Rhaegar's children. They would never see their father again. They had been told he had ridden off to battle for the glory of House Targaryen, and now the children, so small, so uncomprehending, were losing their grandfather too. And the Iron Throne would sit empty unless someone saw to the matter swiftly. "Where is Queen Rhaella?" Arthur asked, though he had a good idea. "At Dragonstone," Oswell replied, "still in mourning for Prince Rhaegar. She was never quite the same after she lost so many children in infancy. If news reaches her of the king's death, she might." He trailed off, eyes drifting. Arthur understood the implications. Queen Rhaella had endured more sorrow than most women in the realm. She had also endured her husband's cruelty for years. If any measure of relief could come from this night, it might be that Rhaella would no longer suffer the mad whispers and the violent fits of the king. But it also meant she would have to guide a shaken dynasty in the midst of a crippling rebellion. Arthur set his jaw. "We must see what we can do to ensure the succession is clear. Prince Viserys is the next in line, with Rhaella as Queen Regent. But the lords and Robert Baratheon will not abide another Targaryen on the throne easily." Oswell's eyes flickered toward the thick wooden doors where the king lay dying. "There might be an alternative." Arthur said nothing. He only turned his gaze away, remembering the oath he had taken when he joined the Kingsguard. They were to defend the king and the royal family, or what remained of it, but the notion of placing Prince Viserys on the throne in these times seemed a fool's gambit. The boy was prone to tantrums, an arrogance that many attributed to his father's blood. Should the lords rally behind Viserys, the war might rage anew. No, Robert Baratheon was closing in, and Tywin Lannister lurked at the edges, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The Targaryen children, Aegon and Rhaenys and Viserys, were in grave danger. A soft creak came from the king's chamber. Grand Maester Pycelle stepped out, his face drawn with theatrical solemnity, though Arthur had little trust for the old man's sincerity. Pycelle's breath caught for a moment as he glanced at the assembled guards. Then he let out a small sigh. "It is done," Pycelle said. "The king is dead." Arthur and Oswell exchanged glances, and in that moment, the hush of the corridor deepened until it felt like even the stones were holding their breath. The realm had changed forever in the blink of an eye. Arthur Dayne gently laid a hand on the pommel of Dawn, as though to anchor himself to something tangible in a world now rudderless. The vow to protect the king had ended. Now he had a new vow, to protect the Targaryen legacy, such as it was, from the rebellion that threatened to sweep them all away. A single tear slipped down Oswell's cheek, though whether from sorrow or fear, Arthur could not say. The clang of distant bells began to echo through the city. The king's death knell spread, though it was a subdued tolling in the darkness, a half-hearted cry. For many in King's Landing, the Mad King's death would not be mourned, but it would still be a marker of upheaval. Arthur turned and began to walk away, his white cloak swirling behind him. He knew where he needed to go. The children were in Maegor's holdfast under guard. Elia Martell was there too, though her health had been precarious of late. He thought of the letter Rhaegar had once shown him, the quiet plea from Elia's brother, Prince Doran, begging that the Targaryens treat his sister well. And Rhaegar had tried to show her kindness. Arthur had been present at some of those gentle, if distant, moments. But war had undone so much. Now, with Rhaegar gone and Aerys dead, Elia was alone, exhausted, her children the final hope for the line of Rhaegar, or so it seemed. He crossed a small courtyard, the sky above black as ravens' wings. The moonlight glimmered on the tiles, silvering the empty fountain in the center. A cool breeze whispered across the Red Keep's walls, carrying the scent of smoke from the city's myriad hearths. Arthur's boots echoed on the stones. He tried to quell the rising swirl of thoughts. He had to act with clarity and resolve, or everything would unravel. He found Princess Elia in a small solar. She was seated before a dying fire, her arms wrapped tightly around her slight frame. Even in her sorrow, she maintained an air of dignity. Her black hair was pinned back from her face, which was drawn from worry, her cheeks hollow. By her side were Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys, both wide-eyed with confusion. Rhaenys was old enough to sense the gravity of the situation, tears threatening to spill from her dark eyes. Aegon was still toddling, small hands gripping his mother's gown. When Arthur entered, Elia lifted her head. "Is it?" He nodded. "The king has passed." Elia closed her eyes. For a long moment, she seemed unable to speak. Arthur watched her carefully, noticing how Rhaenys clutched her mother's hand, how little Aegon seemed restless but also alert to the tension in the room. Eventually, Elia opened her eyes and straightened her posture as if summoning all the strength she had left. "What does this mean for us? For my children?" Arthur hesitated before replying. "It means the throne passes to Prince Viserys. But Viserys is only a boy, and in these times, many lords will not accept him. The war still rages, the rebels are moving, and Tywin Lannister has not yet declared his hand. But you know as well as I do that he is a man of cunning and opportunism." Elia pressed her lips together, a faint tremble in her chin. "If King's Landing falls, or if the usurpers break through the gates, my children, Rhaegar's children, will be in mortal danger." Arthur lowered his gaze. "I fear so, my lady. Robert Baratheon holds no love for Targaryens. He claims the throne by right of conquest now that Rhaegar is gone. And to some, with Aerys' death, the realm's obligations to House Targaryen are severed." Rhaenys, sensing the tension, asked in a trembling voice, "Are we going to die, Ser Arthur?" The question broke Arthur's heart. He crouched beside the girl, letting go of Dawn's hilt so he could rest a comforting hand on Rhaenys' shoulder. "Your father was my prince. I swore an oath to him. I swore an oath to protect the royal family. I will not allow harm to come to you, princess, nor to your brother. Not if there is breath left in my body. Elia exhaled a shaky breath, gratitude and worry intermingling in her expression. What can be done? We cannot hold the city ourselves. And Viserys, I do not know if he can rule, not as a child, especially not in this climate. Arthur recognized the opening in her words, the path that had been forming in his own mind. He felt a twist of guilt, as though he might be betraying the vow to keep the Targaryens on the Iron Throne. Yet it was overshadowed by a more pressing duty, the safety of innocent children. We must leave King's Landing, he said. All of us who remain loyal to House Targaryen. There is a chance for survival if we flee across the narrow sea. The rebels do not yet hold the ports, and we may have enough time to slip away. Elia's eyes widened. Exile? Arthur nodded. It might be your only hope, the only hope for Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys. If we stay here, we are at the mercy of whichever lord raises his banner first. We cannot trust Tywin Lannister. We certainly cannot trust Robert Baratheon or his allies. If we flee, we can regroup in Essos, where House Targaryen still has loyalists, and where we might find coin and men enough in time to make a stand if it comes to that. But your children will be alive. That is the paramount concern. Elia's gaze drifted to the fire, which had burned down to embers. She was silent for a long while. Arthur waited patiently, though he felt the pounding of his own heart like a war drum in his chest. Finally, Elia said, "We must speak to Prince Viserys, and we must consider the Queen's position. She is on Dragonstone, and I do not know if the news has reached her yet." "Queen Riella is likely to remain there," Arthur said. "But we can send word for her to join us, or we can go to Dragonstone ourselves. Yet time is short. The rebels may move swiftly, and if Tywin Lannister decides to seize the city, we'll have no path to the sea." Elia stood, gathering her children to her. Her voice held the quiet, determined edge of a princess of Dorne. "Then we must prepare now. Will you help us?" Arthur lowered his head respectfully. "I will do what I must, my lady, to see that Rhaegar's heirs do not fall." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, a kind of resolve shone there. "Then let us move quickly." They left the solar, guided by the flickering torches that lined the halls. Night had drawn the Red Keep into an eerie hush, despite the peal of bells that had sounded the king's death. Arthur and Elia spoke to Oswell Went, who guarded the main corridor leading toward the royal apartments. They retrieved Prince Viserys, who was ashen-faced at the news of his father's passing. The boy tried to puff up his chest with regal bearing, declaring that as king, he would smite every traitor in the land. His violet eyes shone with what Arthur feared was a glimmer of his father's dangerous pride. But Viserys was still just a boy of 8, shaken by the suddenness of it all. Arthur knelt before him. "Your Grace," he said softly, "do you trust me to keep you safe?" Viserys looked at him uncertainly. "You are the sword of the morning. My brother Rhaegar always said you were the finest knight in the realm. Of course I trust you." Arthur bowed his head in deference. "We must leave this castle, Your Grace, if we are to keep the Targaryen name alive. There are enemies all around us." Viserys glanced at Elia, then at the small forms of his niece and nephew. "Leave? But the Iron Throne? It is mine now." Elia approached, her tone gentle but firm. "The throne is empty, Viserys, and you cannot claim it without an army to defend you. The rebels are strong. We must bide our time. We will take ship to Dragonstone first, or possibly one of the free cities, until we can gather our strength. You will have your throne back one day, but now is not the moment to stay and risk everything." Viserys bit his lip, as if trying to hold back tears. "Father would have never run." A flash of pain crossed Elia's face. "Your father is gone, Viserys, and I'm afraid that if we do not act wisely, you might lose your life as well. Then there would be no Targaryen kings ever again." That thought seemed to jolt Viserys, and he swallowed hard, nodding. "All right, I will do as you say, but I want to come back and rule. I want them all to pay for this injustice." Arthur heard the fierce note in the boy's voice and wondered what sort of King Viserys might become if they succeeded in preserving his life. But that was a question for another time. He rose, his eyes meeting Oswell's. Oswell said, "We'll need a plan to get them out unseen. Any suspicion, and half the court might turn on us for a chance at pleasing the usurper." Arthur answered calmly, though his pulse pounded. "We'll take the postern gate by the river. A small group can slip out under cover of darkness. I know a captain in the harbor who might be trusted, one who once carried precious cargo for Prince Rhaegar. If we can reach the ship without being noticed, we might sail by morning's light." Elia squared her shoulders. "We must hurry. I will gather what I can." "Have you told Ser Gerald Hightower?" Arthur shook his head. Ser Gerald, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, was still away. He had departed with a few men shortly after Prince Rhaegar's defeat on the Trident, presumably to look into matters of the utmost secrecy. Arthur feared that returning to find the king dead, the capital in turmoil, and the Targaryens fleeing would shock even that stalwart man. But there was no time to wait for his return. The safety of the Targaryen children had to come first. So, in that dark hour of the night, the small group moved through the Red Keep's silent corridors. They took little more than warm cloaks, some jewels for bargaining, and the clothes on their backs. Pycelle looked on with feigned sorrow, or perhaps real sorrow, but he offered no attempt to stop them. He only gave a theatrical bow, as though bidding farewell to doomed ghosts. Arthur eyed him with distrust. The Grand Maester had bent his ear to Tywin Lannister too many times before. The important thing was that Pycelle did nothing to raise an alarm. They emerged onto the outer walkway, the cold wind carrying the scent of the Blackwater rush. The city below was largely asleep. Only the scattered watchfires and the glow of taverns in the distance marked signs of life. The bells had grown quiet again. Ahead was the postern gate, manned by 2 guards in Targaryen livery who recognized Arthur and Oswell. With hushed pleas, the Kingsguard convinced them to allow the royal party to pass without fanfare. The guards, uncertain of what was truly happening, could only bow and pray they were not complicit in some grand betrayal. Beyond the walls, the path sloped down toward the river, where a handful of shadows indicated small fishing vessels and river barges moored at the docks. Arthur saw the silhouette of the merchant ship he had in mind, an old cog from the free cities that had once ferried Rhaegar's men to and from Essos on quiet errands. The captain, a man named Drahar, stood on the deck. When Arthur signaled him, Drahar quietly brought a gangplank across. It was an eerie thing, stepping from solid ground onto the deck of a vessel in darkness, guided only by pale moonlight and trust. Arthur was first, then Elia carrying Aegon in her arms, Viserys following sullenly, Rhaenys clinging to her mother's cloak, and Oswell keeping watch at the rear. Drahar bowed curtly, offered no questions, only ushered them to the cramped cabin below. The ship rocked gently, the murmur of water lapping at the hull a steady, ghostly song in the night. Once they were hidden below deck, Arthur dared to breathe more freely. The immediate danger of being stopped at the gate had passed. But the city, the throne, and the ghosts of the dynasty still loomed behind them. Elia sat on a small bench, Rhaenys curled beside her, and Aegon fussed in her lap. Viserys paced, unsettled and angry in that way only a child who feels betrayed by the world can be. Arthur removed his white cloak and folded it carefully, as if performing a final duty before stepping into unknown territory. The realm above them might soon learn that the Targaryens had fled. Possibly Tywin Lannister or another lord might try to seize the city in the chaos. Robert Baratheon's host was not far behind. The crown, if one believed in the sanctity of that twisted iron throne, was now a vacant seat that would inevitably be claimed by the strongest. Arthur Dayne thought of Rhaegar once more, the memory of the prince's contemplative eyes, the sorrow that had lingered there in his final days. He would have wanted his children safe no matter the cost. Arthur let that be his guiding truth. The ship would depart with the tide, heading across the Blackwater Bay and out into open sea. Whether they went first to Dragonstone or straight across to one of the free cities remained to be seen. Arthur intended to weigh the risks carefully, If Queen Riella could be reached safely, he would see that done. If not, they would sail to Bravos or Pentos, perhaps. The children needed to survive. That was the vow he clung to. At dawn, a thin light spread over the waters, and the ship set sail. King's Landing shrank behind them, the Red Keep's towers catching the pinkish rays of sunrise. Arthur stood on the deck, wind teasing his silver-white hair, dawn sheathed at his side, as if standing vigil over a new horizon. The children were below, still asleep from the exhaustion of the night's escape. Elia had drifted into a restless doze, her head resting against the cabin wall. Viserys stared out a small porthole, arms crossed, features tight. Oswell joined Arthur on deck. They exchanged a look of shared understanding and sorrow. "We were supposed to defend the king to the last," Oswell said quietly. Arthur didn't look away from the horizon. "The king is dead. Now we defend what remains of his blood." Oswell sighed. "I hope we made the right choice." Arthur's gaze followed a gull skimming the waves. "I do not know what fate holds, but I know that we could not leave those children to the mercy of a vengeful rebellion. That is all I can say with certainty." They sailed eastward, carrying the last hope of House Targaryen, and so began their flight into exile. The crossing was not gentle. Winter was near, and the seas thrashed with sudden storms. For days they battled rough waters, huddled in the cramped cabins. Elia took ill, retching into a bucket while trying to console her frightened children. Viserys grew nauseous and sullen. Aegon and Rhaenys cried for home. Oswell did his best to help, but he too was unaccustomed to the sea's wrath. Only Arthur remained steady, bracing himself against the swaying deck, forcing down whatever meager meals the ship's cook could prepare, always wearing that calm, almost otherworldly composure that had defined him as the sword of the morning. In calmer moments, Arthur met with Drahar to discuss possible destinations. Dragonstone was the obvious first step if they wished to reunite with Queen Riella, but word had reached them, via a passing merchant ship with an informed captain, that Stannis Baratheon's fleet was already blockading Dragonstone. Robert's youngest brother had been tasked with capturing or killing the remnants of House Targaryen. If they sailed there, they might be trapped or discovered. Arthur weighed the risk heavily. Riella was Rhaegar's mother, and if she lived, they had a moral obligation to rescue her. Yet, leading this small group into Stannis Baratheon's blockade would almost certainly mean capture. Elia was too weak from seasickness, the children too vulnerable. He spent long hours in the cabin, discussing the dilemma with Elia while the children slept. Viserys would stand in the corner, arms folded, occasionally bursting out with demands that they go to Dragonstone and retake their rightful seat. Oswell listened with growing tension, but he rarely offered an opinion unless pressed. In the end, it fell to Arthur to make the final call. "We cannot help the Queen if we are taken," he said one evening, his voice subdued. "We cannot save anyone if we throw ourselves into the lion's jaws." Elia, pale-faced and trembling from another bout of sickness, nodded weakly. "Then we sail for Pentos. It is the largest of the free cities with many merchants. We can seek refuge there, perhaps with Magister Illyrio or another who might take us in." Viserys hissed, "We are Targaryens, rulers of the 7 kingdoms. We should not grovel to these foreign lords." Elia regarded him sadly. "We must do what is needed to survive, Viserys." Eventually, the ship altered its course, aiming north of Dragonstone, skirting the coastline before cutting east to the open waters of the narrow sea. Every day they looked over their shoulders, half expecting sails bearing the Golden Lion of Lannister or the Stag of Baratheon to appear on the horizon. But fortune favored them. The storms and the winter gales, though brutal, served to cloak their flight from any prying eyes. After nearly 3 weeks at sea, they sighted the sprawling port of Pentos, its white walls shining under a cold winter sun. The city was not as grand as Volantis or as exotic as Lys, but it was the gateway to the east for many Westerosi exiles and merchants. As the ship threaded its way into the harbor, the tang of salt and fish filled the air, mingling with the spice-laden scents wafting from the many market stalls. Pentos spread out in a labyrinth of clay-tiled roofs, grand manors, and narrow side streets. Domes and minarets rose here and there, testaments to the city's wealth. Arthur stood at the prow, scanning the keys. "We should be discreet. We do not want word of our arrival reaching certain ears," he told Drahar. The old captain nodded, promising that he knew a small private wharf where they could land unnoticed. Oswell, standing beside Arthur, added quietly, "We have enough coin for a few weeks, but not much more. We must find a patron quickly, someone who can shelter the Targaryens without turning them over to the highest bidder." Arthur's gaze flickered back toward the cabin, where Elia and the children waited. "Let us pray we can find a friend among strangers." Disembarking in secret was not easy, but Drahar proved his loyalty by handling the bribes and ensuring no one recognized the travelers. Dawn's distinctive pommel was wrapped in cloth to avoid drawing attention. Elia and the children wore plain cloaks, their silver hair concealed beneath hoods, save for Rhaenys, who had her mother's Dornish coloring. They were led through the winding streets to a modest estate near the outskirts of the city, owned by a reclusive Pentoshi noble who owed Drahar a favor. The estate was surrounded by a high wall, with a courtyard of olive trees and a small fountain. Inside, rooms were sparse but clean, with stone floors and narrow windows overlooking the city's dusty sprawl. Arthur thanked the noble, a thin man named Coro Loratis, who seemed more interested in fulfilling his debt to Drahar than in gleaning the identities of his guests. But that kind of ignorance could only last so long. Elia was relieved to find a proper bed for the children, though the lingering seasickness and the stress of their ordeal had taken a toll. Oswell made certain that the estate's guards were few and that none bore any allegiance to the rebels across the sea. Arthur watched the city from a high balcony, noticing how the roads teemed with camels, donkeys, and caravans. At night, the myriad lanterns glowed like fallen stars, and the air echoed with foreign music and laughter from wine sinks. It was a stark contrast to the halls of the Red Keep. 2 nights after their arrival, a visitor came to the estate. Arthur was in the courtyard, practicing his sword forms by moonlight, dawn gleaming in a slow, graceful arc through the air. He heard the gate creak open and footsteps approach. He whirled, sword at the ready, only to find Coro standing there, accompanied by a slender, extravagantly dressed man with oiled mustachios and rings glittering on every finger. The man bowed deeply in Arthur's direction. "My apologies for disturbing you, Sir Knight," Coro said, voice tense, "but the esteemed Magister Illyrio Mopatis has learned of our guests and insisted on an introduction. He promises discretion." Arthur lowered Dawn, but did not let go of its hilt. He regarded Illyrio with suspicion. "We came to Pentos in secrecy. How did you learn of us so soon?" Illyrio smiled, showing gold-capped teeth. "Word travels swiftly in this city, especially when it concerns certain rare traits. A princess with silver-gold hair and violet eyes is not so easily hidden, even beneath a cloak. Fear not, I have no intention of betraying you. On the contrary, I see an opportunity for mutual benefit." Arthur's jaw tightened. This was precisely the kind of intrigue he had hoped to avoid. But if Illyrio was as powerful as rumor claimed, ignoring him might pose an even greater risk. Perhaps there was a chance to secure a safer refuge for the Targaryens. "I will speak with you," Arthur said curtly, "but the children must not be disturbed." Of course," Illyrio replied with a flourish. "Lead the way." Arthur guided him through the courtyard into a small antechamber. He signaled to Oswell to stand watch at the door. Illyrio took a seat on a low cushion, adjusting his silken robes with practiced ease. Arthur chose to remain standing, arms crossed. He had known many lordly types, but Illyrio had a fox-like cunning in his eyes that put him on edge. Illyrio studied Arthur with a knowing smile. "I have heard tales of a Kingsguard knight named the Sword of the Morning, renowned for his skill, his loyalty, and a certain famed blade called Dawn. Tell me, Sir Arthur Dayne, are the rumors of your presence in Pentos correct?" Arthur resisted the urge to lash out. "You know who I am," he said. "What do you want?" "Want?" Illyrio feigned surprise, then chuckled, the rings on his fingers catching the candlelight. "A mere word with you to offer assistance." It is no secret in Pentos that the Targaryen cause has fallen to ruin in Westeros. Robert Baratheon will soon be crowned king, if he has not been already. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Starks, all are arrayed against the Targaryens. But here, across the narrow sea, old alliances and old loyalties may be rekindled with the proper incentives. Arthur took a slow breath, calming his nerves. And you would provide such incentives out of the goodness of your heart? Illyrio's laughter filled the antechamber. Hearts are rarely so benevolent, Sir Arthur, but I do see a future profit in aiding the Targaryen exiles. Perhaps one day, when the tides of fortune change, they will remember their friends in Pentos. And in the meantime, I can provide a comfortable home for them, with guards and privacy, ensuring they remain hidden from Robert's agents and from those who might sell them out. And your price? Arthur pressed. Only friendship and a promise that, should the Targaryens regain power, Illyrio Mopatis will be remembered and rewarded. For now, I ask no coin nor immediate favor. Call it an investment in a future that may or may not come to pass. Arthur studied the Magister's expression, searching for duplicity. He found only a calculating light. Illyrio clearly believed that harboring potential claimants to the Iron Throne could yield riches and influence in time. For a man like him, the risk was minimal compared to the potential gain. I must speak with Princess Elia, Arthur said. We will give you our answer by morning. Illyrio bowed again, a gesture loaded with self-satisfaction. Of course, I shall await your word. In the meantime, I will arrange for additional guards around the estate's perimeter, at my own expense. Before Arthur could protest, Illyrio rose and left with a swirl of perfumed robes. Oswell watched him go, tension etched on his face. We're exposing ourselves to a dangerous game. This man could sell us to the highest bidder. Arthur nodded grimly. He could, or he could provide exactly the shelter we need. Either way, we must be on our guard. They found Elia in the chamber she shared with Rhaenys and Aegon. The children were asleep on a low pallet, their breathing soft in the lamplit darkness. Elia, still frail, looked up at Arthur and Oswell, concern shadowing her eyes. Illyrio Mopatis has arrived, Arthur said quietly. He knows who we are and offers his protection in exchange for our future gratitude. Elia frowned. We have no real choice, do we? If he knows, others will soon know. At least with Illyrio, we have a chance of safety and alliances. Pentos has been a haven for many exiled princes. Arthur lowered his voice, mindful of the children's sleep. That is my thought as well. But we must remain vigilant. This man is cunning. We have to ensure the children are never used as bargaining chips. She reached a trembling hand to tuck a blanket around Aegon. We do what we must. I will speak with Viserys in the morning, but I doubt he will object. He cares only for regaining the throne one day, and so it was decided. Illyrio arranged for a more secluded manse on the outskirts of Pentos, higher walls, more private gardens, a fountain courtyard, and multiple rooms that could comfortably house the exiled royals. Guards loyal to Illyrio patrolled the walls, and the Magister provided an array of servants and local delicacies, intent on winning favor. Viserys, for all his haughty pride, seemed mollified by the luxurious surroundings. Rhaenys explored the gardens, chasing butterflies between the tall cypress trees. Aegon, still so very small, toddled along after his sister with wide-eyed wonder. Elia spent her days resting, her health slowly improving under the care of a Pentoshi physician. Oswell and Arthur oversaw the estate's security, never letting their guard down despite Illyrio's outward generosity. Months passed in this precarious refuge. The winter winds began to subside, and rumors trickled across the sea that Robert Baratheon had claimed the Iron Throne, with Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn at his side. The realm had largely bent the knee, or so it was said. Tywin Lannister had seized power as a close advisor to the new king, and the crown lands were firmly under Baratheon rule. Stannis Baratheon, unstoppable in his grim determination, had taken Dragonstone. Queen Riella's fate was uncertain. Some rumors said she had died in childbirth on Dragonstone, others that she had been spirited away, but none knew for sure. Elia wept upon hearing these rumors, grief renewed at the possibility that Riella was gone and that House Targaryen's legacy was reduced to a handful of exiles in a Pentoshi manse. Viserys, though angry at the news, consoled himself with the thought that he, as the rightful king, would someday rescue anyone left loyal. But Arthur could see the fear behind the boy's eyes. Even at 9, Viserys was old enough to understand their precarious position. Spring crept into the world, bringing warmer days and blossoming trees in Pentos. Arthur maintained a strict training regimen, rising before dawn to practice with Dawn in the courtyard. Sometimes he coached Rhaenys in basic footwork, laughing softly as she clumsily tried to mimic his movements. Aegon would watch from behind a pillar, occasionally giggling when Rhaenys tripped over her own feet. Arthur took no pleasure in forging them into warriors, especially not at such a young age, but he understood the realm might one day demand more from Rhaegar's children than gentle words. Oswell spent his time drilling the small contingent of guards Illyrio had provided. Their loyalties were purchased with gold, and so he took care to ensure there were always at least 2 men within shouting distance who had reason to fear losing that gold if any ill befell the Targaryens. Illyrio visited often, bringing gifts of fruit, silks, and rumors from across the narrow sea. He would sit in the courtyard with Elia, spinning tales of possible allies in Bravos or Myr, or of Sellsword companies that might one day be hired to support the Targaryen cause. Elia listened politely, her dignity a quiet shield. Viserys listened with avid interest, occasionally pressing Illyrio for more details on how soon they could mount an invasion. Arthur often stood at the edges of these discussions, arms crossed, measuring each of Illyrio's words like a swordsman measuring an opponent's stance. Sometimes, news from Westeros filtered in through sailors and merchants. Robert had married Cersei Lannister, sealing an alliance with Tywin. Jon Arryn had become Hand of the King. Eddard Stark had returned to the north with his bastard son, fathered during the war. The realm was battered by conflict, but a tenuous peace had settled under the new regime. There was no immediate sign of efforts to hunt down the Targaryen exiles, but Arthur remained certain that Robert would not rest easy if he learned the rightful heirs were alive and well in Pentos. As the year wore on, Elia's health improved enough that she could walk around the estate gardens without assistance. She took the children to the orchard behind the wall, teaching them songs from Dorne. She told them stories of Sunspear and the water gardens, of her beloved brother Doran. Rhaenys asked questions about her father, Prince Rhaegar, about the songs of how he was a great warrior and a gentle soul. Elia spoke of his talents, how he loved music and books, how he believed in prophecy and destiny. Aegon barely remembered his father's face, but sometimes he would stare at Arthur's sword in a manner that suggested he was imagining the father he never truly knew. In such moments, Arthur felt the weight of ghosts pressing down on him. He had been at the Trident, near Rhaegar's side, when the prince rode out to meet Robert Baratheon. The memory of that fateful clash, of Rhaegar's ruby-studded armor and Robert's warhammer, haunted him in dreams. He wondered if this quiet exile, nurturing the children Rhaegar left behind, was the destiny the gods had laid out for the Sword of the Morning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city's skyline and cast orange light across the courtyard, Arthur found himself alone with Elia by the fountain. Water trickled gently, and the air smelled of lemon blossoms. Elia, dressed in a simple gown of lavender silk, watched the reflection of the sky in the rippling pool. "They grow more each day," she remarked softly. "Rhaenys is already so tall, and Aegon, oh, he has his father's eyes." Arthur nodded, standing at a respectful distance. "They are strong children." Elia's gaze was distant. "Sometimes I dream of Dorne, of my home. I dream of returning with them, letting them see the water gardens, letting them play among the orange trees. But that dream seems so far away now." Arthur hesitated. "Perhaps one day, my lady, the realm may change. Robert's hold on the throne might weaken, or there might be peace enough that you could return in anonymity." She let out a sad laugh. "Peace enough for the Targaryens to walk openly in Westeros? We are a threat to him, Arthur. As long as any Targaryen breathes, we will be seen as potential usurpers. And yet we are the ones in exile." He had no words to comfort her. The tragedy was plain. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Elia smiled faintly, turning to face him. "You have nothing to apologize for. You saved my children's lives, perhaps mine as well. You gave us this chance at survival." He felt an ache in his chest. "Your children were Rhaegar's children. I would have done anything to keep them safe. It is my duty." She touched his hand lightly, a gesture of gratitude rather than affection. "Duty, yes, but sometimes I wish you could feel relief, if not happiness, in this place. The children adore you. Even Viserys, in his own prickly way, respects you. You should allow yourself a measure of peace, Arthur Dayne. You have carried the burden of our flight on your shoulders. Lay it down, if only for a moment." He found himself wishing he could, but the vow that shaped him was as unyielding as steel. He bowed his head, murmuring, "Thank you, Princess." She nodded and withdrew, leaving him to the soft twilight and the memory of that fleeting moment of closeness. Arthur remained by the fountain until the moon rose high, the silver reflection dancing across the water. He listened for any sign of trouble beyond the walls, mercenaries or assassins or the clamor of Illyrio's schemes. But the night was quiet, and for once, he let himself stand in stillness, the sword sheathed at his side. The next few months saw a gradual shift in Pentos. Illyrio's visits became less frequent, as though the Magister were occupied with other intrigues or new mercantile ventures. Arthur stayed vigilant, suspecting that Illyrio's investment in their cause might not always remain so discreet. Already, rumors had begun circulating in the city of a boy king in exile, a Targaryen with a rightful claim. Merchant captains from Westeros sometimes cast suspicious glances at the estate. For the moment, no open threats materialized, but Arthur knew that vigilance was their only shield. Meanwhile, Viserys grew restless. At 10 years of age, he was old enough to question why they hid behind walls instead of sailing home to claim his crown. He became prone to fits of temper, lashing out at servants or blaming Elia for not supporting him in a return to Westeros. Arthur tried to soothe the boy's anger, offering to train him in swordsmanship, teaching him discipline through the forms. But Viserys was quick to frustration, lacking the patience required to master the craft. He demanded results, demanded that Arthur acknowledge him as king. Arthur tried to guide him firmly but gently, though he saw too much of Aerys' arrogance in the boy's eyes. Despite these challenges, the children retained a measure of innocence. Rhaenys blossomed into a bright girl who asked endless questions about Dorne, about the history of the Seven Kingdoms, about her father and the type of realm he had hoped to build. She read any book she could find in Pentos, though many were in foreign tongues. Aegon remained sweet-natured, trailing after his sister, wide-eyed and fascinated by everything from the local street performers to the exotic animals brought in by traders. Arthur felt a fierce protectiveness toward both children. If Rhaegar had lived, they would have thrived in the Red Keep. But that future was lost, and Arthur could only hope to guard what remained. Alia's condition stabilized, yet she was never robust. She had always been frail, and the strain of war and exile had taken its toll. Her nights were sometimes plagued by fevers, and she lacked the energy to keep up with the children for long. Nevertheless, she did her best to maintain a regal bearing. She wrote letters to Doran Martell, though they never risked sending them directly across the sea. Illyrio had promised to ferry messages discreetly, but Elia hesitated, not entirely trusting him. She contented herself with the hope that one day she might find a way to inform her family in Dorne that she and the children still lived. The year rolled into another, and the exiles in Pentos settled into a half-life of waiting. News from Westeros told of Robert's feasts, his progress around the realm to secure oaths of fealty, the birth of a son named Joffrey, and the forging of alliances that further cemented Baratheon rule. The name of Targaryen was scarcely mentioned, except in hushed rumors or scornful jests. Arthur reminded himself that as long as Robert believed the Targaryens were gone or powerless, the children would remain safe. Then came a moment that would change the balance of their exile forever. One autumn morning, when the sky glowed a pale gold above Pentos, Arthur woke to the sound of urgent voices in the courtyard. He hurried from his chamber, sword in hand, to find Oswell confronting a trio of men in Illyrio's livery. The men were out of breath, dust coating their boots, as if they had ridden through the night. "What is it?" Arthur demanded, stepping forward. One of the men, a wiry fellow with sweat beading on his brow, bowed hastily. "Sir Arthur, we come with word from Magister Illyrio. He says, the call of a great Dothraki horde is visiting Pentos. Khal Drogo, a man of immense power. Illyrio hopes to arrange a meeting with you and your wards. He believes there could be an alliance to be made." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "A Dothraki call? Why in the Seven Hells would we seek an alliance with a Dothraki warlord?" The messenger shrugged nervously. "Illyrio says that if you wish to reclaim Westeros, you may need the might of the Dothraki. He requests you come to his manse at once." Oswell bristled. "We cannot risk bringing the children anywhere near those savages." Arthur pondered the new dynamic. The Dothraki Khalasars were known to be fierce riders who roamed the eastern plains, seizing plunder wherever they wished. They had never crossed the narrow sea in force, but rumor said that gold or a grand promise might tempt them. Illyrio's cunning nature likely saw an opportunity, a Targaryen restoration backed by Dothraki warriors. But the idea of exposing Rhaenys and Aegon, and even Viserys, to such brutal allies made Arthur's blood run cold. He dismissed the messenger with a curt nod. "Tell Illyrio we will consider his invitation. Return at midday for our answer." The men bowed and departed. Arthur turned to Oswell. "We must speak with Elia and decide how to proceed." When they found Elia, she was in the garden with the children, enjoying the morning sun. Rhaenys and Aegon ran about, chasing each other among the olive trees. Viserys leaned against a pillar, gazing at his siblings with an aloof expression. Elia looked up, concern evident. "What's happened?" she asked, seeing the alarm on Arthur's face. He told her of Illyrio's proposal, how the Magister wanted them to meet with this Khal Drogo to discuss a potential alliance. Elia listened calmly, though her eyes grew troubled. Viserys pricked up his ears at the mention of alliance, stepping closer. "Dothraki? They're said to be the greatest warriors in the world," Viserys said. "If they join my cause, we could return to Westeros in no time. Baratheon wouldn't stand a chance." Elia gave her nephew a reproving glance. "They are also a savage people known for pillaging and slavery. Are we so desperate that we would consider unleashing them on the Seven Kingdoms? What would that make us?" Viserys scoffed, his face twisting. "Survivors, Aunt Elia. Kings, we have the rightful claim. Would you have us rot here forever?" Elia's lips tightened. "I will not have my children or the people of Westeros subjected to a Dothraki horde's brutality. But we must tread carefully with Illyrio. We cannot offend him. He is our host, our protector." Arthur nodded. "We can at least hear what he has to say, but we must not commit to anything rash. If Illyrio insists on presenting Viserys as a suitor for some Dothraki pact, we need to be certain of the consequences." Viserys frowned, crossing his arms. "I am king. I will do what is necessary. We will talk to the Dothraki if it means getting our throne back." Elia looked from Viserys to Arthur, a weary resignation in her gaze. "Very well. Let us go to Illyrio's manse. But not the children. Rhaenys and Aegon will remain here with Oswell. I will come with you, Arthur and Viserys. We will see if this Khal Drogo is truly a man we can even consider dealing with." That afternoon, they departed in a modest carriage escorted by Illyrio's guards, winding through Pentos's bustling streets. The city smelled of spices, sweat, and ambition. Arthur could almost taste the tension in the air, as if the Dothraki presence hovered like a storm cloud. People whispered of the fearsome Khal and his 1,000 riders encamped outside the city walls. At Illyrio's palatial manse, larger and grander even than the estate they occupied, servants greeted them with bows, leading them through marble halls adorned with gold filigree and tapestries from distant lands. Eventually, they reached a courtyard where a feast had been laid out. There, they saw Illyrio beaming, resplendent in plush robes, and beside him stood a tall, imposing figure with copper skin and a long braid falling past his waist. Khal Drogo. He radiated the easy grace of a predator, eyes scanning the newcomers with an air of faint curiosity. Viserys drew in a breath, trying to appear regal, though his slight frame and youthful features paled in comparison to the Khal's formidable presence. Elia inclined her head with polite reserve, while Arthur remained tense, one hand never far from his sword's hilt. "Welcome, welcome," Illyrio exclaimed. "Come, feast with us. Khal Drogo has traveled far, and he is eager to meet the last dragon." Viserys squared his shoulders, stepping forward with what he likely thought was kingly poise. "I am Viserys Targaryen, the third of my name, rightful king of the Undulls and the First Men. You stand in the presence of a dragon." Khal Drogo watched him in silence for a moment, then turned to Illyrio and said something in a harsh, guttural language Arthur assumed was Dothraki. Illyrio laughed. "The Khal says he sees no dragon, only a man, but he is pleased to meet you and your kin." Elia exchanged a look with Arthur, who could see the nerves beneath her composed exterior. They took seats at the low table. Servants rushed forward with platters of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and flagons of spiced wine. Illyrio directed a translator to stand nearby, bridging the language gap between the Targaryens and the Khal. They spoke of many things, of Dothraki victories across the sea, of the might of the Khalasar, of the wide lands they roamed. Viserys boasted of Westeros's riches, the Iron Throne, and how the Targaryens once united the realm with dragons. Khal Drogo listened impassively, occasionally nodding, occasionally uttering a low grunt. Arthur watched carefully. The Dothraki men who accompanied Drogo eyed the Targaryens like curious onlookers, fingering their araks and snorting at Viserys' claims of kingship. Illyrio smoothly attempted to charm both sides. He would lean close to Khal Drogo, describing the wonders of a Targaryen alliance, then turn to Viserys and Elia, praising the Khal's strength and how it could help restore them. At one point, Illyrio broached the subject more directly. "Khal Drogo desires a queen worthy of his Khalasar. Your Grace, you have a younger sister, do you not?" Viserys stiffened, confusion and anger mixing. "My sister, Daenerys, died along with..." He hesitated. "My mother died on Dragonstone, or so they say. I have no living sister to offer." Arthur's stomach clenched. If Daenerys had been born on Dragonstone and the rumors were true that both she and Rhaella had perished, there would be no bride to offer. He felt a pang of sorrow for the child who might have been. Illyrio masked his disappointment with a sorrowful expression. "Ah, that is most unfortunate. The Khal desires a Targaryen bride. A union of fire and blood, if you will. It would have cemented a mighty alliance." Elia bristled. "You speak so casually of trading away my husband's kin. We are not cattle for the Khalasar." Illyrio's rings flashed as he patted the air soothingly. "My lady, I meant no disrespect, only a suggestion of how we might forge a closer bond." Khal Drogo spoke low in Dothraki, and the translator hesitated before interpreting. "The Khal says he does not wish to waste time on fruitless offers. If there is no bride, then any alliance must be paid in gold and promises." Viserys, frustrated, demanded to know what the Khal might accept in exchange for crossing the narrow sea to conquer Westeros. The translator relayed that Khal Drogo had no desire to see wooden horses across the poison water. The ocean was a fearsome barrier to the Dothraki, and they did not sail well. Gold alone would not tempt them to cross. Tension mounted. Elia's expression grew cold, and Arthur laid a protective hand on the table, ready to rise at any moment if the Khal or his men grew hostile. But in the end, the meeting ended with no clear bargain struck. Khal Drogo left with a dismissive nod, as though deciding this had been a curiosity, nothing more. Illyrio exhaled in disappointment once the Dothraki departed the courtyard. "Such an unfortunate turn," the Magister said ruefully. "If only Princess Daenerys had lived. But no matter, we shall find another way." Elia stood. "My children will not be sold to the Dothraki, nor will Viserys. We are grateful for your hospitality, Magister, but I must return to the estate now." Illyrio bowed. As you wish, princess. But do keep in mind, the Iron Throne cannot be won with courtesy alone. Arthur guided Elia and Viserys out to the carriage. Viserys was seething, muttering under his breath about how the Dothraki were cowards for not daring to cross the sea. Elia maintained her composure until they were safely within the carriage, at which point she slumped, exhaustion evident. Arthur watched the city pass by the windows, worry gnawing at him. If Illyrio was so eager to broker a marriage alliance with the Dothraki, it meant he might look for other opportunities, other alliances, other ways to leverage the Targaryens. Their fragile shelter in Pentos was not going to remain peaceful forever. They arrived back at the estate to find Rhaenys reading to Aegon in the courtyard and Oswell waiting with a grim expression. "There's been a raven," Oswell said, "addressed to the last Targaryens in Pentos, delivered by a Braavosi courier." Arthur felt a chill. Robert's men? Or some trick? "I don't know," Oswell admitted, handing Arthur the parchment. "But the message inside. You should read it." Arthur broke the seal. It bore no obvious sigil, only a stylized fish that might have been from Braavos. He scanned the contents, his eyes narrowing. The letter offered information about a potential threat. It spoke of a hunt for the dragon spawn, implied that a spymaster named Varys was feeding the new king Robert rumors about Targaryens still alive in Essos, and warned that assassins might soon be sent. The writer claimed to be a friend of House Targaryen, urging them to move from Pentos before it was too late. Elia, reading over Arthur's shoulder, paled. "We have so few friends across the sea. Who would send such a warning?" Oswell looked grim. "The risk is that it's a trap, designed to flush us out." Arthur considered the possibilities. If Varys, the so-called spider, truly served King Robert now, then any knowledge he possessed of Targaryen survivors would be deadly. They could not assume safety here. "We must consider leaving Pentos," Arthur said quietly, "before the usurper's assassins come knocking at our door." Viserys, listening in, startled. "We run again? I am tired of running." Elia lifted her chin, tears threatening but not falling. "We must keep the children safe. That is all that matters now." She took a steadying breath. "We will gather our belongings and find a new refuge, somewhere further away from Robert's reach. If Illyrio cannot guarantee our security, then we must look elsewhere." Arthur stared at the letter, thinking of the countless roads across Essos, the cities of Lys, Myr, Tyrosh, Braavos, Volantis. None were truly safe, each with its own intrigues, and Robert had gold to spare. But they might have no choice. With a heavy heart, Arthur nodded. "I will make the arrangements. We will leave under cover of night, as we did from King's Landing. Let us pray the gods still watch over us." Elia touched Arthur's arm gently. "You have watched over us, Ser Arthur. We will trust in your guidance." He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the day Ares died, the morning they slipped out of the Red Keep with terrified children clinging to their mother's skirts. This was their life now, a perpetual flight from the dagger in the dark. Yet his vow remained steadfast, to protect Rhaegar's heirs, no matter the cost. If they had to become wanderers across the vast continent of Essos, so be it. Until or unless the winds of fate changed, their survival was his only purpose. And so, as Pentos' sun sank on another day, Arthur Dayne began to plan yet another escape. He did not know where the road would lead them this time, only that he would meet its perils with sword in hand, unbowed, unbroken, guided by a knight's resolve to shield innocent lives. Shadows gathered, and the world grew colder, but still he stood as the sword of the morning. In his heart, he clung to one unwavering truth. While he drew breath, House Targaryen's last children would not perish. Their story would not end in the darkness. And perhaps, in some distant dawn, they might find a home that was more than just another hiding place.